Welcome to Wines We Drink, a podcast for wine lovers and learners. I'm Charlotte Norsworthy Varnum, and together with my counterpart Keith Herndon, we'll be exploring a new wine each week. Keith is a lover of wine, and I'm a learner of wine, and we hope you'll sip along with us. Welcome to Wines We Drink, a podcast where we have fun drinking wine and talking about it. I'm Charlotte Varnum, and with me as always is my co-host Keith Herndon, a certified wine sommelier.
Hello, Charlotte, and hello to all of our listeners. We're coming to you today with our 5th episode in Season 5. The summer is moving along at a nice clip. Next week, we'll be at the midpoint in our summer case of episodes.
I can't believe it. It's flying by. Like you said, we're in Keith's Wine Kitchen, our home studio today. But in a few minutes, we are going to take our senses to Napa Valley for today's wine selection. A beautifully balanced Chardonnay that we know you're going to love as much as we do.
We called last week's episode a bit of a deja vu for our listeners because we were featuring Finger Lakes recently for the second consecutive season. Well, once again, for you loyal listeners, this episode may be another deja vu experience. Our Chardonnay today is an iconic wine from the famous Farniente winery, which we featured in our very first season, Charlotte.
It's crazy because I remember that like it was yesterday. I mean, time, just like the summer is flying by, it feels like that was 5 seconds ago. So this is a great opportunity to remind you all that if you've missed our earlier episodes from this season or any other seasons, you can find them and all the episodes on the major podcast platforms, including Apple Podcasts and Spotify. But we also have a full episode guide at wineswedrink.com. We don't usually repeat wineries featured in earlier episodes, but we're using Keith's wine book, where I served as editor, as the foundation for this season's shows.
Yes, we are, and the book includes an interview with Nicole Marchese, the winemaker at Farniente, and I knew from the outset that we had to feature her Chardonnay again. I mean, it's so good,
yeah,
right? But before we get into the wine, allow me to give a shameless plug, right? Okay. The book is entitled Wine Conversations, Exploring Meaning, Mystery, and Myth, and it's a compilation of interviews I held with 16 wine industry experts. You can get the book from Amazon, our local distributor, Neighborhood Books, or directly from the publisher. We have the links to order on our homepage at wineswedrink.com.
Well, and so far, the content from the book has inspired some really great wine selections for the podcast, and we're about to get into another one again, and I'm excited.
Yeah, absolutely. In Season 1, we featured the 2017 vintage of the Farniente Chardonnay. Today, we're opening and drinking the equally wonderful 2023 vintage.
I love hearing you talk about your visits to Farniente. It sounds like such a wonderful place, so scenic. It's a visit that's high on my bucket list one of these days.
Yes, on your next trip to Napa, you have to go there. Anyone wanting an exceptional Napa experience, I mean, I can't recommend this place enough, right? You'll find it on a hilltop in the heart of Oakville, behind one of those majestic gates that you think you're in some kind of European villa, right? Driving up to the entrance is just magnificent. And then once those gates open and you're on the grounds, you're essentially in a botanical garden.
Wow.
There are ponds and willow trees, and coming from Georgia like we are, right? The Masters and all.
Yeah.
There are thousands of azaleas on this property. And if you go there, May, June, when the azaleas in bloom, just amazing, But I would say, don't just show up. This is a place where you have to book in advance.
Well, at this point, I'm dreaming about it so much that I would book as far in advance as possible. Right. But would you say that's becoming the norm in Napa in general?
Oh, yes, it is. I mean, so many of the wineries there, I think, have become so popular, and that area has become such a popular tourist place that some of the wineries have just had to control flow. Yeah. So anyway, but I would say that, having those reservations is worth it when you can visit properties like this one, right? There's so much history here. The winery was founded in 1880, believe it or not, wow. and it was thriving until it was abandoned around 1920 at the beginning of the Prohibition era. But about 60 years later, Gil Nickel took control of the property and brought the winery back to life. What it has accomplished since then is just simply remarkable. I mean, Farniente only makes 2 wines, Chardonnay and Cabernet Sauvignon.
Wow.
2 varietals. And their wines are among the best of those varietals that you'll find anywhere.
What an amazing history. And you want to talk about specializing. And when you read your interview with Nicole Marchese, I could really sense the dedication that she has for creating great wine. I mean, the pride she has in Farniente and the wines she creates is so evident in how she describes her work and the wines themselves.
Absolutely. So before we drink today's wine, let's listen to a brief clip of her describing it.
The word balance, I feel like, is very overused, but it's a very good word to describe wines that we try to make. And so for Chardonnay, we are really trying to look for this balance of power and elegance, where the Chardonnay should have richness and body to it. And so like it's mouthfilling on its texture, but it has very beautiful, elegant aromatics and great acidity. So it's walking that fine line of being a big Chardonnay or being an austere Chardonnay. It sort of like cuts right down the middle.
Well, I'm ready to drink some of this balanced Chardonnay. Would you please pour us a couple of glasses?
Yes, let me do that. I'm going to get the bottle here and get it open. Right?
I know that we always talk about how you can't judge a wine by its label, but I particularly love the label design from the Farniente Chardonnay.
Yes, it is a very nice label. If you're wanting to see what we're talking about, we always put a bottle shot on our social media. You can find us at The Wines We Drink on Instagram.
Mm-hmm. That really helps you be able to spot it in your favorite bottle retailer. So as you were pouring, this wine has a real richness to its color. It's very golden, but with some greenish reflections in the glass. It's very pretty.
Yeah, it's a real pretty wine. I put a lot of stock into a wine's initial aromatics. And when pouring these glasses, I mean, the aromas are so pleasing.
Yes.
Right? The citrus notes, the floral notes, they embrace your senses.
I'm sticking my nose in here and trying to see what aromas I can find. And you're right. There's a lot happening in concert here right now.
Right. A lot of California Chardonnays are over-oaked for me, and it masks the aromatics in some ways. Like Nicole said, there's a balance to this wine, and it starts with the nose, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm going to describe what I'm smelling here is maybe orange citrus, even some of that blossom, like we were talking about with the floral, maybe some hints of melon.
Yeah, you are spot on here with the official wine notes. You probably cheated when you were preparing our food for later.
Well, I mean, I had to, because yes, we will have an awesome food pairing, but also, this is reminiscent of the 2017, right?
Yeah, very much so. The official wine notes that I was just mentioning there, they calls out nectarine and honeydew melon.
Yeah.
So, you were spot on there. Let's go in for our first sip here today.
Oh, wow. First sip impression, bright, zesty, citrus, definitely a lemon lime effect, a little bit of a pucker and juice. Let's go in for another.
Yeah. I mentioned those floral notes earlier, in the aromas, but the tasting notes identified lemon verbena as a flavor on the palate. That's a really specific reference to a plant that has tiny white flowers that emit a sort of lemon aroma, lemon scent.
Right, and I think it speaks to the combination of the citrus with the floral, right? There's still definitely some of those lemon zest aromas coming through, and you get that lemon lime effect on your tongue. Again, it's incredibly juicy and bright, but I wouldn't have associated that with verbena, right? I wouldn't have pulled that out specifically.
Right, neither would I. That's why I find these tasting notes so interesting. They can be very creative, right? For this wine, I especially enjoyed the notes from the famous James Suckling reviews where stone fruits were mentioned.
Yes, I would say stone fruits for sure are definitely present in this wine and more identifiable, maybe.
Yeah, Suckling identified Asian pear aromas and yellow apple flavors. It just adds another layer of flavor complexity to the wine, right?
Yes, and on that too, clearly this wine has spent some time in oak barrels, which just adds a little bit of that creamy texture, maybe even some nuttiness there on the back end of the flavor. But this wine is not overly oaky at all.
No. I'll go with hazelnut right?
Yeah.
And a bit of baking spice on the finish, which is definitely a sign of the French oak. The winemaker's notes tell us this wine was aged on its lees, which is the yeast sediment, in French oak barrels that had a medium toast. 45% of the barrels were new, 55% were used once. So some nice oak, oak exposure there. The grapes were harvested in September and October, and the wine was bottled and released in the summer of 2024. So that means the aging was about 9 months. The result was the balance in the bottle that Nicole talked about.
Absolutely. Chardonnay really kind of runs the gambit in terms of what you can get. And so I really appreciate her perspective on this. She certainly has her processes under control, and she knows how to deliver a great wine.
Absolutely. Yes, she does.
So how much would our listeners have to pay for this expertly crafted Chardonnay?
Well, I'm glad you mentioned expertly crafted. The bottles I purchased cost around $65, but checking some online retailers, I found that there are some deep discounts out there for case purchases. One had the cost down to $49 if you buy it in bulk.
Okay, well, maybe it's time to stock up on some great Chardonnay.
Well, it is indeed a great Chardonnay. James Suckling scored it 93 points, and the Vivino app considers this vintage among the top 2% of all wines in the world. It is truly a remarkable wine, and I'm thrilled that Nicole gave of her time so that I could include her interview in our book. And that reminds me that it's time to remind you, our listeners, that the wines we feature on the show are the wines we drink, as our title says, right? We don't feature any promotional wines, and we don't take any money for wine trips in exchange for featuring a wine on the podcast. If you buy a case of this wine, we won't get a kickback, right? We only feature wines we like, and we're not paid to promote them.
Yeah, that's a great point. We are an independent show. We're not influencers, after all, okay? We drink the wines that we like.
Well, I'm certainly excited to talk about food and wine pairings, particularly with this one, right? I know you've adopted your Chef Charlotte persona for this segment of the program, but before we hear your thoughts, let's play another clip from our book interview with Nicole Marchese about her favorite pairing with this wine.
What I love is with the Chardonnay and lobster is, the fatness and richness of the lobster is balanced with the beautiful acidity of the Chardonnay. But I think that because our Chardonnay also has some really great texture in the mid palate that is, silky and has volume and some creaminess, like texturally, it echoes the lobster.
I'm always interested in food and wine pairings, and I certainly took my inspiration from the food content posted on Farniente's website. They've got some great recipes on there, and clearly Nicole's lobster suggestion is an outstanding compliment for this wine. I mean, you can't second guess the winemaker, right? But since I had already paired lobster with Mark Neal's wonderful Vermentino in our third episode this season, I wanted to try something a little bit different for this pairing, and that brings me back to the website.
The website does feature a lot of interesting recipes and suggestions for pairing. So, Charlotte, as Chef Charlotte, what did you decide on?
The chef hat is on
Yes.
as we speak. So I selected their recipe for a spring pea risotto, and I put my own spin on it by topping it with some juicy sautéed shrimp, a little protein pump, if you will. But of course, that's certainly optional if you'd like. And so I'm going to serve you now a small plate of that so that we can try it with today's wine.
Well, this looks wonderful, listeners, but I wish we had a way for you to get a whiff of this wonderful dish. It smells incredible, so please serve it up on some plates here.
Yeah, absolutely.
The creaminess is just jumping to your nose.
Thank you. Yeah, I think a lot of people hear risotto and default to thinking of it as a fall or winter dish, but Farniente's recipe with the fresh baby peas, finely minced shallots, really makes this a year-round treat.
Yeah, so let's dig in here. Oh, wow. This first bite is amazing.
The smells together, too, I feel.
Absolutely. It's creamy and springy all at once. So I'm going to take a sip of this Farniente Chard with this. Oh, wow. This is, right off the bat, I can tell it's a great pairing. The acidity of the wine cuts through the cheesy risotto, and that bite of shrimp, provides that bit of seafood that works so well with these wine citrus notes.
Yep, and the butter, the Parmesan cheese in this recipe certainly gives the wine something to work well with. It kind of brings out that oakiness as well, the nuttiness. Overall, I think this wine's fresh minerality as well is complementary to this dish.
Well, okay, another bite.
Yes.
This is fantastic. I'm usually not a fan of peas. But,
that's fair.
Man, but in this dish, the peas are fantastic.
I think the peas and the shrimp, but I think the peas also bring it into the season, right?
Absolutely.
Brings it into a spring and summer.
Absolutely.
With still a little bit of comfort and coziness to it.
But you're a coastal gal.
I am.
And you had to add shrimp to this dish.
I gotta put shrimp on everything.
It just put the Chef Charlotte stamp on it, right?
Yes.
So I'm convinced. Chef Charlotte, you've sold me on this pairing. Let's sip some more wine and eat some more of this risotto as we take a short break.
That sounds good to me. Listeners, please stick around during the interlude. We'll be back in just a moment with the portion of the show that we call The Finish. We are back from the break and ready to wrap up today's episode with the show segment that we call The Finish. In today's wrap-up segment, Keith is going to talk about the dramatic changes underway in California wine.
Charlotte, I'm going to start with a bold assertion.
Okay.
I think California wineries, especially those in the Napa Valley, are now making the best wines they ever have. I mean, bottle after bottle that I open, I'm blown away by the quality of the wine. I mean, even many of the labels that we would associate with grocery store wines are punching above their weight, right? I'm just going to call it a quality explosion. I started thinking about that after we opened this season with 3 of our 5 wines from California.
Well, that's great. So then what's the problem?
Well, quality's not a problem, okay? But there are a lot of issues lurking around behind the scenes, okay? Let's start with this startling statistic. California produces around 80% of the wine in the U.S., but we have to brace for an unusually small 2024 vintage. The U.S. Department of Agriculture reported in March that the 2024 crush was down 24% and is the smallest crush in California for over 2 decades.
Oh my gosh, that's such a steep decline. What's behind that?
Well, some of it is due to nature. I mean, parts of California have experienced some severe drought. And of course, we've all seen the video and the pictures of the devastating wildfires that have burned through parts of the state.
True.
Some of the fires have destroyed vineyards and also caused growers to destroy tons of grapes that were tainted with smoke.
Wow, okay. Well, is that enough to account for that, though? Is that the whole story?
Not at all. The industry is having to face the fact that it has been producing way more wine than there is a demand for it. Quality notwithstanding, consumers, especially younger consumers, aren't drinking as much wine, and California is having to confront its oversupply.
What does that mean? How do you confront the oversupply?
Well, I'm just going to talk about it in harsh terms. It means ripping out vineyards and converting the land to some other use. The drinks business reported that last year saw more than 37,000 acres of California vineyards dug up to help address the oversupply. But many in the industry believe that's not enough, that a lot more acreage has to be taken out of production. There was one grower association in that article calling for another 50,000 acres to be removed this year just in help to bring the industry into balance.
50,000 acres. That's a lot to accomplish. What's going to happen if they don't get it done?
Well, I think prices are going to continue to fall, and that will put some more pressure on the industry overall. After all, grape prices per ton across all varieties in California fell 4.5% last year. That kind of price decline isn't sustainable for some of the growers. So we're going to see more vineyards fail, and then in turn, more wineries fail.
Well, geez, that's a rather sobering finish for today's show, no pun intended.
Well, I think for shows like ours, it's important to acknowledge that there are a lot of issues going on behind the scenes, and we have to talk about the overall context of the wines we drink, right? But I'm going to go back to where this segment began. The quality of wines today are exceptional, and we're going to keep finding the ones that we like and bringing them to you, our listeners.
That sounds like a great plan to me to keep it going. So believe it or not, next week will be our 6th episode. We always celebrate, right? We'll have a more positive note here at the end.
Absolutely. And again, I think we have to talk about the context of the industry, but the wines that we drink are exceptional, and California is making fantastic wine. So we're going to accentuate the positive, right?
Yep.
And so throughout our first 4 seasons, we always celebrated the midpoint with sparkling wine, right? But we've never had an actual champagne. Well, for this year's 5th season, we're going to be featuring a wonderful French bubbly, and it's from Champagne.
Officially? Fantastic. Y'all, we're 5 years into this, and I finally get to talk about some actual French champagne, the truest of the true. Oh, I'm so looking forward to celebrating with everyone next week. So I will see you then, and I'll see you then too, Keith. Cheers.
Yes, cheers, everyone.
Thanks for listening to Wines We Drink. Listen to our other episodes anywhere you get your podcasts, and be sure to follow us on Instagram at The Wines We Drink, and check out our episode guides at wineswedrink.com. Cheers.